In May, Jeffrey Roth will speak to us about psychotherapy groups. In June, Art Nielsen will talk to us about um, his new book, Integrative Couples Therapy in Action. So that will also be interesting. In July, Dr. Robert Gallagher-Levy will talk to us about how systemic racism enters the consulting room. And in August, Sarah Mena will speak to us about adoption, which is something that we're focusing on a lot here. But without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Jordy Kleiner and Tina Giordano. I'll just say a few words about each one, which you have in your announcement. But Dr. Kleiner is the director of North Shore Learning Clinic in Evanston. He conducts comprehensive psychoeducational evaluations of children, adolescents, and adults impacted by learning disabilities, attention disorders, and other neurodiversity. He also provides individual therapy, and he draws on his classroom experience teaching all ages of children from preschool through graduate school. He received his BA in psychology and education from Swarthmore and his MA and PhD in learning disabilities and language and cognition from Northwestern. I think we turn to Jordy a lot here when we need special consultation about a patient who has neurodiversity and we're trying to figure out the best way to engage them. So Jordy's really been a friend of ours for a long time, and we're really glad, Jordy, that you're joining us. He has with him Tina, who's one of the people in his practice, who received, Tina's an Evanston native. She received her Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Education at McGill University in Canada. And she's currently working on her Doctor of Psychology at the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at National Louis University. Tina has worked in a multitude of educational settings and roles, including developing an inclusion program at the Lincoln Park Zoo for their camp programs. That must be really interesting. And to work effectively with clients at the North Shore Learning Clinic, she uses her knowledge of best practices in education and her experience as a social skills educator. And we'll leave it at that. So I think we have some really good experts here, and I'm looking forward to what they have to say. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jordy and Tina.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's a wonderful introduction. It's a real treat to be here with you all today. This Colleagues in Conversation series has been a treat to do. I think this is my second time doing it. Last time was years and years ago. And just the role that Yellowbrick has really served in the community, both in terms of, helping our most challenged, individuals, as well as the professional, if you will, being an attractor in our community to kind of pull together wonderful professionals, like yourself, is just invaluable. It's just wonderful. And so thanks for doing what you do. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss this topic. We have a lot of information to share with you. Can everybody see the slides okay and get good audio? Okay, great. Yeah, let us know if not. We're going to be speaking today about scaffolding post-secondary independence. That's both academically as well as in job setting for young adults on the spectrum.
I'm going to go over a brief agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about what is autism spectrum disorder, and then the outcomes for individuals with autism for the post-secondary transition. So what are their employment and university or post-secondary education outcomes? We're going to talk about the definition of scaffolding and apply it in a clinical context. And then we're going to organize our presentation with 4 predictors for successful employment for individuals with autism. And then time for your questions. We're going to explore the applications of multiple models of disability to improve employment, and we're going to incorporate peer-reviewed research, clinical examples, and leave you with some actionable recommendations that you can take with you. So hopefully there's going to be something for everyone in this presentation.
there are a lot of different ways of understanding and experiencing autism. And just in order to be able to get us kind of on the same page, we do want to lay out a few initial operationalizations of autistic spectrum, and just so we can all be referring to the same thing, or something related to that. So according to the DSM, there are kind of two features of autism, and we're not going to get too much into the diagnostic end of this. We could give a whole other presentation in terms of kind of neuropsychovals and how we tend to identify it and levels of severity. You know, there's a lot of nuance to that world. What we're just going to focus on right now is just kind of functionally what is autism, again, so we can be on the same page. So there's these two components. You know, one is the kind of social communication and social interaction part of this. And then the second is in terms of restricted interests and behaviors. That first area, in terms of the social kind of language basis to this, there's often difficulties in terms of reciprocity, social emotional reciprocity. There can be a lot of difficulties in terms of nonverbal communication. And then more broadly, just in terms of social emotional relationships, to be able to initiate, to be able to sustain relationships, and a lot of the nuances in there can be difficult. In terms of the second set of criteria for autism, there are these stereotypies or kind of repetitive movements and areas of interest. There can be the kind of inflexibility, the cognitive inflexibility, where routines need to be the same, and then the sensory components of this as well, in terms of being sensory defensive, sensory seeking, and so these are this, you know, a collection of traits. Very few people have all of these. Very few people on the spectrum have none of these. And also want to point out that this, again, is a spectrum. And so there are going to be many things in our presentation tonight that are going to feel irrelevant for this or irrelevant for that. We are, again, speaking in terms of generalities and kind of the exemplar, the kind of threads that run through autism.
And going off of that, there is a quote that sums it up. If you've met one person with autism, you've truly met one person with autism. It is a wide spectrum, as Jordy was saying, and so we need to consider the strengths and needs of each individual and their specific circumstances when we're designing interventions so that they can have the best outcomes. So in our clinical examples, we're really going to hone in on those strengths of clients that we've worked with. And then we talk about those threads and the core features of autism. So there are core features that go through everything, but then we have these strengths of individuals, and it's such a wide spectrum. So we need to keep that in mind throughout this whole presentation.
In terms of the terminology that we'll be using, there's a history to this. You know, Asperger's existed a few years ago. Now that was kind of collapsed into the autistic spectrum. We'll be using a wide variety of terms. So we'll be using, you know, some people feel strongly about person first language, disability first. We'll use terms like neurodiversity, autism, autistic spectrum disorder. We'll be using these interchangeably. And again, people have preferences, and that's their choice to be, you know, to choose what it means to them. We often will use the terms that are reflected in the literature review or in the clinical examples as we bring in examples from our own work with people in the clinic.
And so it's important to think about the context when we're addressing this situation. So for post-secondary education, 36% of young adults in the autism spectrum engaged in it, and they engaged in either 2-year, 4-year colleges or vocational training, with the majority in 2-year colleges. And this is significant because for individuals with autism in young adulthood, they have lower rates of post-secondary education than most of their peers with other types of disabilities. So there's something unique about autism that is where they're experiencing a less engagement in post-secondary education, and 40% of individuals that disclosed their disability received accommodations or some type of help. So among those that did engage in post-secondary education, only 40% that disclosed their disability received accommodations. And this is drastically different than the accommodations that they're receiving in their throughout their educational career up until this point. There's a similar pattern with employment outcomes. So for all individuals with disabilities, this is based on really recent data. They experience twice the rate of unemployment than their neurotypical peers in young adulthood. So this is a problem for the wide range of people with disabilities. And then people on the autism spectrum experience even lower employment outcomes throughout their lives, and especially in their young adulthood. So 58% had ever worked after high school in the young adulthood period, which is up till mid-20s, when compared to their peers with other disabilities. And then they were often more disconnected, even if they were engaged with work or education, than their peers with other disabilities. And why is employment important? Well, so employment for young adults helps develop financial independence, but it also helps them improve their self-confidence, self-worth, figure out what they want to do with their lives and develop a career, promotes independence, self-determination of who they are, and increases engagement in supportive relationships. As we mentioned before, autism can have social deficits, so having structured environments where they're engaging in these relationships is essential, and it indirectly leads to a better quality of life.
One of the ideas we're going to recruit pretty heavily during this presentation is the concept of scaffolding. And so I think it is important to define it again so we can be on the same page. Many of you are familiar with scaffolding, but it's really an educational and psychological construct that allows us to go beyond what we're able to do independently. Lev Vygotsky has his notion of the zone of proximal development, where at one end it's what I can do independently, and at the other end it's what I can do with the assistance of an expert other. And we're going to be recruiting this image of scaffolding to help improve the lives of people on the spectrum. One of the big ideas in here is that there's a process of moving from any skill acquisition to application to automaticity. There's a process of I do, we do, you do. And the image that scaffolding is really the giving of a gift. That much of our work is about getting out of the way and making sure that the person that we're working with is doing something on their own. I want to get a little bit more concrete in terms of scaffolding. This is a construct that I ended up doing some research on years ago, and that was really looking with more neurotypical population, but we're going to again use that idea to generalize to others. If we look at a task like the specific task here is called the Tower of Hanoi, which is like a executive functioning task that we use in the clinic. It involves moving rings along pegs and planning ahead. If somebody's stuck on a puzzle like this, there are a range of supports that we can give as educational specialists or as therapists to be able to help somebody when they're stuck. And along the left column here, we can see a level of 0 to 5, 0 being no assistance at all, just like if they're stuck, give it another shot, keep at it, and 5 being the most supportive or scaffolded or explicit, which is to demonstrate, here, let me just do it for you. And then there's a wide range in between that, some of which does include pointing to relevant features. Hey, did you notice this one's bigger than that one? Pointing out relevant features in there, the idea of recruiting general strategies. Remember what worked well on this other puzzle? Do you want to try it on this one? So we have a range of choices. And what a lot of the literature has shown here is that in general, less is more. We want to offer the least amount of support as necessary to be able to get to good outcomes. The way that we look at this is in terms of this concept of we call scaffolding the adjunctive function. And adjunctive function is basically what we need help doing. So if somebody needs help organizing, we're almost acting like their frontal lobe, right? We're reminding them of a session, or don't forget this, or remember to pack your backpack up, or things like that. So we're kind of helping provide that function. And the dynamic that often comes up is that, ironically, by supporting some of these skills, we're actually undermining our client's ability to develop that very same skill. We're basically doing it for them. We're over scaffolding. A few examples, here, organize things this way. Here's the first, second, and third section. That means that they don't have to actually practice doing any of that organization on their own. We're spending too much time on this. Let's get to the next thing. That actually atrophies this mental muscle, if you will, of task switching, when a client feels like there's something else that's more important that I want to get to. The idea of catch all your careless errors, my least favorite term. Here they are. Look, you missed this and that and this and that and this and that. That means that they're not actually practicing detecting those. And so they're not getting better at monitoring. So by over scaffolding, we're actually atrophying the exact skill we're trying to build.
And so, as we discussed, there's a wide spectrum of individual experiences with autism, but we need to be able to look at, use a framework for looking at this. So we're using a meta-analysis of studies with thousands of participants that came up with the 4 main predictors of successful employment outcomes for adolescents with autism spectrum disorder by Pillay and Brownlow. And so the 4 are traits and behavioral intervention, functional independence, supported workplace intervention, and family advocacy. And we're going to start with traits and behavioral intervention. So there are many traits associated with autism that adversely impact access to competitive paid employment, which include behaviors that are ritualistic, aggressive, uncooperative, that can be socially inadequate for this situation or require intensive support. And so it's important to address these social skills so that it can help. It's important to address these social skills so that we can improve access to competitive paid employment. And so also employment can actually help stabilize these behaviors over time. So it's important to improve these behaviors and help individuals with autism engaged in employment. And then once they're engaging in employment, that can actually help stabilize these behaviors. One of the key challenges with autism, as we mentioned, is social deficits. So conversation ability is hugely important in the workplace, whether it's talking to your colleague, talking to your boss, even in the interview process of getting a job. You need to be able to express your needs, express your ability, and take the other person's theory of mind, take their ideas into account. So when you're in a job interview, you need to be able to think, what do I need to say that's going to help me get hired? What do they want here? And so for individuals with autism, it's no different. The ability to converse is directly related to engagement in employment. So for those individuals that had no trouble conversing, 88% had ever been employed in young adulthood. And then as ability to converse decreased, so did the percent that were ever employed. And individuals, even for higher functioning individuals on the autism spectrum, their ability to communicate, their expressive language is less than their ability to understand, their receptive language. So they're understanding more than they can communicate. And so we need to think of ways that the workforce and post-secondary can really tap into the full potential, because this is a missed opportunity for individuals with autism, but also for society, which could benefit from their unique abilities and strengths. And this quote sums up, I often feel 5% askew. I want to connect, but something gets lost. It's a quote from one of Jordy's clients, and it's, they want to connect, they want to convey what they know, but something is just slightly off. And so that's that ability to really communicate what they actually are understanding.
there's an unlimited number of skills that could be addressed, right? We could make such a long list and spend our entire life developing that. But what are the ones that are really most central, that are most important for us to focus on? Again, according to that definition of autism, language really plays a central role in it. And what are the aspects of language that are most impacted? The domain of pragmatics, the way the language is used. In many ways, people on the spectrum, especially higher functioning, have amazing skills in terms of semantics, the meaning of words, the syntax, the phonology. There can be these not only intact, but really well-developed areas. Pragmatics is often an area that we want to take a look at. And in this domain, there's nobody finer to work on scaffolding with this than speech-language pathologists. They just have a wonderful set of skills, are able to kind of decompose a complex act into its individual components, build those up, practice it, generalize it. It's really wonderful working with great speech paths. And again, broadly, the principles that we'd use here to develop the pragmatics would be broken down into receptive or listening skills and expressive speaking skills. Figures of speech, irony, sarcasm, idioms, these can just go right over the head of people on the spectrum, and those can have high consequences in the job setting. Making some of the inferences to figure out, how these three different sets of utterances, come together to a conclusion, and therefore what to do differently in the job setting. Expressively, can be difficult to get things like turn taking, proxemics, how close to stand to somebody, to really use your nonverbal cues to communicate your communicative intent, and then again to how to adapt your language to different audiences. And so we often can feel progress in one domain where in the clinic, hey, look, they're able to wait their turn and ask appropriate questions and stuff, and then you transfer to texting or to the Zoom setting or some other arena, and then we need to develop it again. In some of the wonderful referrals that Yellowbrick has sent over for diagnostics, we've actually taken clients into the community and just go to a cafe and see how do they interact with the barista. And there's this experience of misophonia where sounds like eating can be really, really aversive and loud. And so we can see what that feels like, in the setting. So it's really important to consider the pragmatics in the setting for these things. Tina earlier alluded to this theory of mind, which is one of the cognitive key components. The idea of being able to see somebody else's experience as rich as my own is something that is instrumental and also really amenable to the clinical setting, where we can model that in therapy and in educational therapy. Have a brief video clip here to rest our mouths and to illustrate some of these points in terms of the importance of pragmatics. This is from the Netflix series Atypical. Oh. I'm going to try this with some zooming and hope you can see this.
In second grade, Madison Gold gave me a Valentine with a picture of a Western honeybee on it that said, "Be mine," B-E-E. I didn't understand why the word bee was misspelled, but she was nice and explained it to me. That's the first joke I ever learned. Hey, Madison, be mine.
What?
Would you like to go on a date with me?
That's so nice, but I'm busy.
Okay. Wait, I didn't tell you when the date is. Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern.
I'm still busy.
Okay. I also forgot to tell you that you would be my practice girlfriend. The person I really like is Julia, my therapist, if that makes it any better.
It makes it worse.
If Friday is bad, I could do Thursday instead.
Oh my God, I don't want to go out with you.
Why not?
Because, look, no offense at all, at all, at all. But you're really weird, and you wear the same clothes every day. And I also have this guy from camp. I haven't seen him in a while, but we text all the time.
I need new clothes.
I think you're muted, Jordy.
Yeah, we're just trying to find our other
Stop sharing,
slide.
reshare. I
I'm
think
going to stop sharing for a moment and then we'll reshare.
we. One moment.
That's what happens when you try to do high-tech stuff like showing a video.
This is a fabulous lecture, by the way. Loving it.
Oh, good.
Oh. Forget me.
This, to this, to this, to. Yeah, okay. And now we need to share screen again. Doop, 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 doop. Maybe this. Can you see? Can you see in here?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. Okay. We'd like to bring you into the juicy part, the clinical work, the actual people here. Like to describe some interactions around executive functioning that came up with a client on the spectrum to model the point that educational therapy, through its structure and its content, can really leverage strengths to target certain weaknesses. Often I will give a client a prompt, or a question like, what time of day is your attention best or worst? And this client said, let me think about it. I'll notice it and get back to you. And came back next week with this. Now, this is a pretty high functioning person on the spectrum, but this is an amazing chart. Here's my focus per time of day, different colors chart. It was wonderful. It was an amazing, kind of set of reflections. So when this came back after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I was like, we can leverage this kind of metacognitive act, or, to be watchful of our own functioning to help target other more difficult areas. And so we really targeted something called interoception, which is our ability to kind of tune in with our body and tell, how am I feeling? She struggles a lot with like different pain levels, don't register easily, and other kind of sensory things. And so we use this kind of metacognitive self to really help develop her, what we call quantified self, and got some nice mileage with that. When we make changes clinically, we often wonder, like, what changed neurologically, right? Like, what actual hardwiring changes are happening? And there's a wonderful article that I want to share that discusses this, question of scaffolding for adolescents on the spectrum in terms of this construct of cognitive control. If we look at becoming a young adult, there's a lot of cognitive control, maybe the gear shifts in our car, our mental car. We need the brake pads, we need our accelerator pedal, we need to change gears. And it turns out that these are some of the behavioral difficulties, especially for people on the spectrum, that we see less growth in these areas of cognitive control than in their neurotypical peers. specifically three domains here. One is the idea of this cue or context maintenance, where we're just reacting to what's coming up, instead of being kind of purposeful, being more reactive. The idea of response inhibition. So the idea of having a dominant response and being able to hold back on that. We almost see that in Sam's behavior with the Netflix series. And then the third domain here is set shifting or task switching, to be able to move from this to that to this to that. And if we're in an area of fixation and great knowledge, it's very difficult to shift set out of that. The next question that the authors asked was, what are the neural underpinnings to these aspects of cognitive control? And we are able to see changes, neurological changes to some of these, specifically in terms of the anterior cingulate. We do see greater pruning of white matter in the parietal cortex compared with peers. And then we also see different functional connections between three networks. And many of us are familiar with the central executive network. It's a lot of the executive functioning, the kind of planning ahead, and kind of purpose-driven behavior. But there are two other networks too that warrant some focus. One is the salience network. Basically, how do we tell what's salient, what's relevant, what to attend to, what's the most important thing being discussed? And when you think of your experience with people on the spectrum, this makes a lot of sense. And so we do see neurologically that the salience network develops less during adolescence. The third network is the default mode network, which is getting a lot of focus in the literature now for a bunch of different reasons. But broadly, the default mode network is basically what our brain is showing when we're in an fMRI and doing nothing. It's basically kind of its resting state. Typically, there's a very distinct or dissociated mode when we're in our default mode versus our executive control mode. So we are blobbing out, associating on our phones, doom scrolling, and then we are in work mode. And that is a distinct mental cognitive place, if you will. Those differences are less pronounced for individuals on the spectrum. And it may be that this salience network actually mediates those two, where it's really the network that says, this is time to really get my act in gear and get myself to work, versus this is time to hit snooze on the alarm yet one more time. There are also strong correlations between the default mode network and self-reflection and kind of social processing. And so this is an area that really warrants further examination. And when you're working clinically with people on the spectrum, we can really imagine massaging, if you will, developing, cultivating, this default mode network and the salience mode network. What does that look like to scaffold salience? Can you help somebody figure out what's important? This wouldn't seem to be top of mind, but we've had some neat clinical success helping clients determine what's important. So person comes in and says, how does anyone know the important thing to talk about in session? And that can be interpreted on many levels. But if we look at it in terms of the spectrum, we can almost think of it like a topographical map, right? And that for many of us, we have mountains and we have valleys, and those mountains are really important. I need to say this. And the valleys are something that can fade into the background. And imagine if that topography was just flat, instead of that salience. And so, a lot of our work is adding a third dimension, to clients' experiences. The way that we did this, again, we use the structure and content of educational therapy to target that. At the end of session, we kind of quit about 5 minutes early and just reflect back, like, what did we just do? What was the most important thing that came out from, from this work together? If you were to describe this to a friend or a parent or someone else, what would be the 3 things that might be take homes from this? And then we can reflect on, oh, I thought this, oh, I thought that. It's again, scaffolding and sharing that function rather than leaving that to somebody and hoping that they got what we intended them to get. Before sessions, I will often ask clients to send a list of like 2 or 3 bullet points of something they'd like to address beforehand, so that we can be sure to get it. And they just send some bullet points. And many people benefit from this. We call it kind of leaning on session. And it's a nice reflective act of like, what did happen during the week? Or what are the pieces I really want to follow up on from last week? The person that I'm thinking of on the spectrum really struggled, both in terms of coming up with the bullet points and then also keeping them to bullet points. So the bullet point became sentences, the sentences became paragraphs, the paragraphs became discourses. And after a while, there was, whole essays written. And so what we did, again, scaffold that, was reflecting on it together. Let's say we just wanted to highlight, 4 words in here that really capture this. What would be the most important 4 words? Oh, you think this? Oh, I was thinking that. And we kind of negotiated and come to that shared understanding. Again, this is a way to clinically build salient. And we can practice it in other settings. During that job interview, what were the 2 most important things that happened? During that interaction with your boss, what were the 3 most important things?
And so, so if there are any questions, we're organizing it as educational therapists. So after each section, we're leaving room for a few questions. So you can put them in the chat if you have a question now, or write it down and save it for at the end. And then we're going to dive into functional independence.
Michael, do you want to share any questions, or we'll kind of lean on you as our moderator? You're okay with that?
Well, I mean, one question is, you're talking about scaffolding salience, and how, one of the difficulties we have here, because our population is, people who really haven't, for a lot of different reasons, been able to make a go, that they've had serious difficulties. What would you say about how to scaffold salience in terms of what is disruptive behavior, or helping someone see that their behavior is disruptive to somebody else and it's causing them problems, and the other people problems too?
I'm not even sure that that's salience. I mean,
yeah, okay.
You almost need to explain what, the impact that it had or something like that. I mean, it's true that they wouldn't see it as salient. But I feel like there'd have to be a lot of earlier work before the salience question in that example.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we're kind of going to talk about something that is related to that with functional independence, where a lot of the work is even just figuring out what is the goal, what do these individuals want, and we're going to talk about that with functional independence. But once you have that goal, then it becomes more salient for these individuals of what behaviors are appropriate, because if they're motivated by this goal, then they're going to engage in undesired behaviors, or they're going to have to conform their behavior to meet that goal. So having a self-directed, self-motivated, intrinsic motivation towards their goal can help mitigate those behaviors, because it develops salience in their lives. Okay. And for the sake of time, we'll address whatever other questions there are at the end.
Well, so there is one question that's coming through now. Do you want to wait, or?
We'll try it. Go for it.
Okay. Someone thought of salience as one of the neural constructs of ADHD, specifically the processing controls. So processing controls of attentional systems. That's what this person sort of mentioned.
Yeah, I can see that being related. I think that can be difficult in ADHD as well. You know, often we become slaves to our dopamine system, and that becomes more important than, again, waiting your turn or being considerate to somebody else's experience. I think the difference that I see it on the spectrum is that it's a little less about regulation. And a little bit like, even if everybody's, again, very calm and has all the time in the world, it can still be very difficult for someone on the spectrum to tell, like, why would anybody find that conversation topic, interesting or relevant, or what would they want to say about it? Versus ADHD, I think it is a little more regulatory.
Yeah. Okay. And so functional independence, this is going back to what I was saying about being motivated by your goal. So the definition is the ability to finish a task without prompting, regardless of the level of personal interest. And so we're adding a layer to that. So why would anyone want to do something that's not interesting to them? Well, they have a goal. They want to become a doctor. They're going to go to med school and delay the salary. So your goal is what is inspiring you to engage in these tasks that you lack personal interest for. And functional independence is being able to see the relevance of those tasks and engage with them without prompting. And so during young adulthood, for individuals with autism, functional independence typically it plateaus and eventually declines. So between the 20s and 30s for individuals with autism, when for typically developing individuals, it typically increases during this period because you have a higher need to be independent. You're maybe living on your own, you're trying to make your own family. And so they found that having better, like, functional independence in daily living, personal care, use of public transport, use of a telephone, and now with cell phones, appropriate use of a telephone, reading analog time, increased access to competitive paid employment for individuals with autism. So this is an issue that functional independence is declining in this period where it's so important to have it. And so for these individuals that did have more of it, it increased their access to competitive paid employment. On the other side, decreased functional independence in personal care, public transit, and social interaction is associated with increased dependency on your family, which can stress the family system and the state welfare system, and increased access to adult day services and respite activities. And that is likely due to a greater need. So individuals with less functional independence are going to have a higher need for these services, and they might be able to access them at a greater level. And so what does this look like clinically? One of my clients came into the clinic with the goal, and so the goal is always central in educational therapy. What does this client want? Who are they? What are they trying to figure out in their life? And so they came in with the goal of being independent enough to study abroad and go and study in another country. So this is an individual with autism. And the parents initially over-scaffolded. They picked their son's university, checked his daily assignments, decided that it would be better if he went to a local university. And due to this over-scaffolding, they felt like, how am I ever going to achieve this goal? So they applied without parental knowledge to a university in Europe, in the Czech Republic, and made a non-refundable tuition deposit. So they were going no matter what, no matter if they had the skills, no matter if the parents thought they had the skills. So the parents said, okay, we need to scaffold. We need to make sure that our child gets the support that he needs to be able to be independent and get his goal, because he is so motivated to get this goal. So they hired us at the North Shore Learning Clinic, and we worked really hard for several months on functional independence interventions to help him attain this goal and feel confident enough to do international education. So we started some of the things that we addressed, and I'm going to go into two areas in more depth, are appropriate cell phone use, because it was getting in the way of studying, and good grades, which are required to go on a study abroad. Even learning the language of the country you're going to be living in, that's essential. If you can't get groceries in the language of the foreign country, then how are you going to eat? And then assessing his state of skills. So what are the skills he has? What do we need? How do we get there? So that's scaffolding. What is our goal? Where are you? How do we bridge the gap? How do we scaffold so that they get there? And then you take away the scaffolds and they're still there. They don't fall back. That's scaffolding. It's like, if you have good scaffolding on a building, you end up with the building. If you don't, well, that's not a good story. So, and he's off. So hopefully it was enough to make him have a successful, he felt confident enough to go to Europe and study. So that's wonderful. So this is a specific example that we used. So his first self-awareness, he came in and said, I am using my phone too much. This is a problem. What do we do? So we created ideas together, and eventually we came up with the idea of using parental controls for screen time. And he asked me to hold the password to his accounts, which is the highest level. With the Tower of Hanoi example, that would be level 5. Like, I'm holding the password. He can't access his phone for distracting applications. So his homework ability to turn in homework on his own increased. And so eventually we shifted to him controlling when he cannot use the app. So he controlled the password, and the phone would just lock for several hours. And there are a bunch of great apps for this because, you know, cell phones, they're designed to be constantly clicking them. So we do have to, and he even came up with the idea of turning his phone gray so that he wouldn't be as engaged, because the colors are designed to engage your brain. Another specific example is, and this is a beautiful one of over scaffolding. We divided the skills up. What do you need to be successful in Europe? What do you need to be successful at home? And so he had so much over scaffolding that he couldn't identify the skills that he needed at home, because he didn't really realize there wasn't that level of independence. There wasn't a need to do these skills and think about, what do I need to be independent? There were some skills that we were able to think of, like laundry, organization, time management, and cleanliness, but he was much more able to think about, what do I need in Germany? And then, so awareness of the skills, if you're not even aware of what skills you need, you cannot work towards them. So building this awareness of the skills, then we were able to practice making a budget, look at what is healthy eating, what do I need to do to get healthy eating, what might I engage in other than school, how do I pick my classes, just all these questions that you might not think about. Scaffolding helps to get them to that point where they can do that. And he started taking language lessons, and then we also practiced social skills, because as we expressed, social deficits are key to autism. So we practiced how to engage in an orientation, like with other European study abroad students. And then it increased his level of confidence, and he felt confident enough to go. And so another area, a trait, is decision making. And so individuals with autism have difficulty making decisions because of too much time collecting and looking at information and indecisiveness, and this can be combined with anxiety. So you need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the individual, allow adequate time, and scaffold this. So a clinical example of scaffolding this is the college decision. Where am I going to go to college is such a big decision. Up until this point, there are only so many options for elementary and high school education. And then all of a sudden, you're picking, what do I do with my life? Where do I go? What do I want to study? What does this look like? So a way to help scaffold that is providing these questions that have them think about, what do I want? What does that look like? What's the weather like? So this example, it was, what environment is life-giving for me? So how big is the school? Where is it? What does it look like? Starting so that they can picture what their life is like in their mind. Another example is the creation. The goal here was to become a storyboard artist. And so the idea of making a portfolio of storyboard art is this huge task. You know, I need to make this huge portfolio and impress these companies. So we broke it down. The individual works with a professional 2 times per week for 1 hour each time to build a storyboard. And the scaffold goes beyond the quantity of the storyboard to the actual content. So we're going from original scenes to original characters, and eventually that storyboard portfolio will be competitive to compete against both neurodiverse and neurotypical individuals.
We've covered two of these predictors, that are really key in terms of post-secondary success. We're going to focus on what can happen in the workplace. And this is an important component because a lot of our techniques and our focus is really what happens between the two ears. And that's just really one model of what needs to change. If we really look at what's considered the social model of disability, it's really about removing barriers and changing the world, not just changing individuals, right? Diversity is something to be celebrated. And this is, best example there is wheelchair ramps, right? That we don't, teach somebody to get up it, you change the building, and that's something that can become institutional. And some of the articles here actually say that during the pandemic, we actually learned a little bit more about how to change institutions, of food delivery services and other things. You really can change, at a broader level, not just at an individual. And so what comes up, in the workplace? There are questions of, should I disclose that I'm on the spectrum? Is that something to try to hide or to mask? Is that something to disclose? If so, when would I do that? Is that something in a cover letter? Is that something, during an interview, after you get the job offer? Do you wait until, hopefully something doesn't go wrong? And there's some wonderful writing about this. It's, the approaches to that are as varied as individuals, right? And it really, really depends on the level of functioning, level of impact. But I think some of the key ideas there is, if you're going to disclose, the idea of finding a confidential place for that, the idea of being proactive, that what are the accommodations you're going to be wanting, and to be kind of that shared focus. And then also just to keep in mind that, you are entitled to be considered for any position based on your skill and your merit, in that realm. And I'll talk about some areas that do a really good job with that. The services cliff. Many of the clients that we're working with when they're younger are supported through a model of IDEA, IEPs, and 504s, accommodations. Most people on the spectrum would be through IEP services. And, so 97% of youth get services through an IEP if they're on the spectrum. And then age 21, IEPs stop, and the need for the services does not stop. And so this is the services cliff. Transition to 504 plans and accommodations. ADA does cover people at work, not just at school. And the vehicle that's really important here, if you're working with this population clinically, is to lean heavily in terms of the transition plan on IEPs. It's getting increased focus right now in schools, in high schools, but we can really load a lot of demands in there and heavy scaffolding with it, so that people can really feel more independent in their workplace. The literature, when we examine what are the interventions that make a difference, really point to the importance of job coaches, the importance of having somebody on the inside of the organization whose job it is to help you through the organization, to have a mentor, the idea of psychoeducation, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but to have trained staff who understand what ASD is, and how that impacts job performance. And one of the most helpful frameworks for looking at ways that organizations can change to be more friendly to neurotypical individuals is looking at Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, that look at different ways of engaging with your work, different ways to represent your work, different ways to act on and express your work, where you're still performing your deliverable. It just looks different sometimes in terms of the inputs and the outputs. And as is often the case, when we make progress through advocacy, it actually benefits many other people who are not even on the spectrum. So in some ways, you're doing a service to others as well. Clinically, the things that we've found most beneficial in working with clients as well as their workplaces are the principle of transparency. If there's a policy and a practice, these things should be written down. These are things we can have a manual to review, as opposed to somebody being told on the fly, well, I don't like the way that you do that, or here's the way that we do things in retrospect. They need to know things on the front end, and that can be something with a stable visual reference to be read through and reviewed and consulted. The idea of feedback, regular job interviews, if they can be regular, if they can be weekly, monthly, quarterly, rather than, oh, great, there was another terrible thing that you just did, and now we need to have another meeting about it. So when it's proactive and regular, that really benefits people on the spectrum. When goals can have specific positive and negative feedback, we don't want to have these subjective assessments. We want to have quantified goals, deliverables, and that it can often be up to the neurodiverse individual to find how are they going to reach that goal. One of my clients really benefits from crowdsourcing. You know, on a Zoom meeting, why is everybody looking really tense? Why is there a lot of silence? You know, why is everybody's language suddenly louder and faster? And she'll just have people she can ask, what's going on? Did I miss something? And to have, again, somebody on the inside to help kind of translate that really is beneficial. I want to point out one example of a company that really has done an amazing job. And it's a local Evanston company called Aspiritech that is somewhere near Yellowbrick, North Shore Learning Clinic. And Evanston has some good work happening. And Aspiritech is a wonderful company that provides QA, quality assurance, and user testing. But the people that they hire are entirely on the spectrum. I think 100%. I'm not exactly sure that, but in the past I've done some consultations with them, and it's just it's been a wonderful example of ways of celebrating strengths and also differential scaffolding, where the support that I was pulled in for was not, you know, how to make these worker bees get better at their deliverables, because they were doing fantastic in terms of, you know, the product. The difficulty was what to do during lunchtime. What does it mean to take a break? You know, how do I converse with people after work, and some of the kind of softer skills? And so, so anyway, I just want to point out that, you know, these things really can be done well. And they actually have some nice guidelines in terms of things that other companies can do to help make them more friendly and amenable for people on the spectrum.
And family plays such a large role in supporting individuals with autism. So we're going to touch on family advocacy intervention. And so that's any action taken by a parent on behalf of their child to ensure adequate support or even just basic human rights. So parents are at the forefront of ensuring that their children are getting what they need and able to reach their full potential, and also benefiting society through the great contributions of individuals with autism or on the autism spectrum. So greater family advocacy is associated with increased social support networks and access to employment opportunities. And it takes a sequential pathway as new concerns arise, because with life, as you reach different stages, there are going to be new concerns and new things that you're advocating for. So parents, this begins in the very early stages of even identifying that your child has autism. So you're expressing concerns, you know, he's not really speaking yet, or not engaging in education in a way in meeting their full potential. And so you're expressing concerns to professionals, raising awareness about your child and how they're doing, and then seeking help in acquiring services. And as these needs get more complex over time, this cycles through. So what we're talking about is expressing concerns about postsecondary and employment outcomes. So what is my child going to do? Where are they going to be able to work? What support are they going to be able to get? Raising awareness about this is an issue. There are barriers here. There are things that they need that they don't have access to. And then seeking that help and acquiring services. Some of these potential barriers are, you know, if ADA is not being enforced and someone is getting discriminated against for having autism, you might need to engage financial resources to hire a lawyer. You may need to engage a lot of time explaining to the employer what your child needs, because since social deficits are inherent to autism, oftentimes parents take the role of that voice in communicating on behalf of their child. And then there's a lack of knowledge and support for employers, and then sometimes even for families, they don't even know where to look. Where do I look? How do I access this support? And it's our job as clinicians to help bridge this gap of knowledge and service delivery. And then there's the stigma. Should I disclose, as Jordy said? What, like, is it going to be obvious? Are they going to make assumptions? Is it better for them to think I have a disability, or to think that I'm a little bit socially awkward? What is the best route for me? And since autism is so personal, it's about really seeing that individual, not this is someone with autism. This is a person and they have autism, and that is part of who they are, but then they have goals beyond that. So in addition to my clinical experience with clients, I've experienced family advocacy interventions firsthand through my parents' efforts for my brother who has autism. And so I'm going to talk about how all of these interventions kind of come together. So we have who he is and how autism looks for him. And then my parents have to engage in self-advocacy, explaining to the employer certain things about what he might need. And we're scaffolding the transition to work. His goal is to become a storyboard artist, and he has the artistic ability, but we're building the job skills that he needs to succeed in that high-level environment. So we have our goal and we have the functional independence, and we're building on that. So his work is scaffolded. So it's 2 times 2 hours a week, building those skills of arriving to work on time, consistency, engaging in a team. And he drew this portrait in his uniform. And so then raising awareness in psychoeducation, one of his behaviors, he didn't understand the social cue that you can just go to the bathroom and they won't worry that you're not doing your job. And so he kept saying, I need to go to the bathroom. I need to go to the bathroom. And no one was responding. So self-advocacy, so family advocacy, actually, in this case, where the family needed to step in and explain, you know, this is characteristic of autism. Some things need to be explained in a more structured way. Like, you know, there was no policy explained about that, so he couldn't have known what to expect. And so we're looking at the whole individual. We're building functional independence, we're building family advocacy, building better work environment by helping management understand autism better for individuals that come through later. And so you can really see how all 4 of these pathways come together to help the individual accomplish their future goal.
We have our references here. Just want to wrap up with a few concluding thoughts, and then we'd really welcome questions and discussion. We've talked about different models here, you know, the kind of neurological or medical model of disability, the social model of disability, in terms of what should change in institutions. There's also an evolutionary perspective, you know, that can be helpful to keep in mind too. But right now, as a species, we really have a more prolonged adolescence than ever before. And what do we do with that? And so the principles that we're discussing here are really helpful for us as a species. How do we really launch? And how do we individualize, you know, this beautiful transition towards independence and being able to provide for yourself on multiple levels. And so, you know, I'm hoping as we take this process more seriously and individualize it, you know, we can benefit the individuals that suffer most. We can benefit the organizations that really need those skills, and that we can benefit society more broadly. What questions?
What a great presentation. So Julie Blackman asks, how do you scaffold recent college graduates in terms of structuring their time and job searching?
A complex one. Maybe I'll speak to it, and you have some
Mhm,
experience with this too.
mhm.
I think the first piece would be making sure that there's a shared goal. I think we often presume a lot as a, wait, is this as a parent or as a professional? Or unclear, both?
I would guess both.
Okay. So I think it's really important to make sure there's a shared goal. You know, do you want to work in independent? What does that look like to you? You know, I love this image you have of like where we are and where we're going. And so to make sure that that's a shared goal. And then the idea of decomposing that goal into little steps. You know, what are going to be the pieces towards that goal? How wide do we want to go? You know, everybody gets turned down from so many jobs. And so how many do we want to apply to knowing that that's going to happen? The idea of front loading the process, you know, when we get rejected from companies, what are we going to do with that? The idea of strength-based work, you know, what are the things, we refer to this in this Ikigai thing, you know, what are you good at? What do you love doing? What can you get paid for? What does the world need? And really working all of those quadrants. And then I think, you know, the last piece I would add there is humility. You know, that we presume that we know what somebody needs, but you know, this individual may be the one to tell us what we can do to support them.
Yeah, I think that is a great starting point. And then as we've been saying, you know, you really think about the person you're trying to support and what their strengths are, what they need. And then also like understanding that it's not going to be like snap your fingers, here I am process. It's like there are going to be weeks where the time doesn't seem well spent. There are going to be weeks where it feels really hopeful and you do get a great opportunity, but then you get to the interview and they tell you more about the job and it's only on weekends and you don't, or it's only at night and you have a specific bedtime. So it's remembering that it's what Jordy said about humility is really important. It's like, yes, it's like pacing. It's what we're talking about with the scaffolding. You want to meet them where they are and you want to push them towards their goal, but you don't want to push them too fast because then, you know, imagine a rainy road. If you push too fast in the car, it's going to veer off. So you need to make sure you're going to the right speed for the conditions. So maybe that client has wonderful conditions and it's perfect and you can go 70 miles an hour, but maybe there's a storm that comes through one week. And if you push too far that week, it's going to break the therapeutic alliance or, you know, confidence even. So yeah, humility in this process, understanding that it's not as straightforward and, oh, I passed this grade, I got to the next grade. The job search is kind of like that chart about Jordy's client's attention. It's all over the place and that's okay. Career is not a straight line, as we know. So.
Last piece I add there too is that Tina found this wonderful link. We linked it in the presentation called Roadmap to Employment. And we can provide a copy of the slides if that would be helpful in just in a PDF version. I think it'll link to that might have some very concrete, helpful steps.
Yeah. Yeah. If you get those to me or to Tracy, we can make those available to others, or we can ask them to reach out to you either way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to combine two questions here, and it kind of also, they both sort of touch on where my mind goes, again, given the setting that I work in, and that's where the intersection of neurodivergent or struggles of people with neurodivergent, where that intersects with mental health struggles. So Dana Dean Doring asks, you know, resilience is a huge factor. Minimal resilience knocks many young adults out of consideration for any employment, internships, or opportunities, even when they have good skills. And then John Russell asks, sort of, how do you know, about the self-esteem struggles that come up when they're dealing with when people are dealing with defenses or denial of what their limitations are. So in case of anything broader, I can come up with something broader, but
No, I think that's important. We didn't touch too much on the mental health components of this, and that's not to undermine that at all. That's an entire presentation, the kind of comorbidity, you know, and the as your resilience gets knocked down, you know, that's awful. There are also, you know, the whole realms of the legal issues around this. There are issues of relationship difficulties, you know, that happen with autism. So there are a lot of components not addressed. You know, I think one kind of beacon, you know, in the light here is that there are online resources, and the online community for neurodivergence is like healthier and stronger. Well, I don't know about healthier, but it's prevalent. There's a lot out there, and so there can be, you know, kind of finding empathy with other people that are going through similar experiences, you know, in a way that hasn't existed historically and may not exist for some of the other mental health difficulties.
Yeah, and hopefully this is relevant, but a little bit thinking of it from a different lens is like, as Jordy said, we just didn't have enough time, you know, to address that, but also the theory of mind piece. So for individuals with autism, for most individuals graduating or going to the next thing, they're more isolated from their peers' experiences. So they're not seeing their friends getting rejected, especially with social media. You're seeing all of these successes, and LinkedIn, you're seeing all of these successes. You're not seeing those failures. So especially with the theory mind difficulties in autism, if you can't even or even if it's really hard for you to see someone else's experiences, you're really not going to see that other people also are struggling, or what that context is. So maybe as a clinician, bringing in that context can help. And then, as Jordy was saying earlier, like, and as we've both been saying, individualizing it, right? Showing that success isn't just 40-hour-a-week job. Like, if what you can handle right now is a 2-hour-a-week apprenticeship in something that you love, start there, right? So you're not saying, okay, your goal is 40 hours a week. You're saying, okay, your goal is that, but you're here. So let's make a new goal for right now that builds that confidence, builds that self-esteem. I have a great clinical example for this, actually. One of my clients wanted to build social competence, and we didn't send him into like a dating, like a bar, speed dating, right? Like as the first thing. We sent him into a board game night, and he went by himself and he played this board game with someone, and I asked him how it felt, and he said he felt empowered. So something as simple as starting there can build that confidence for that later thing. So that we call that FAR transfer in educational therapy, where you take a skill in one setting and you build that confidence, and then it can transfer to something else, like the job search.
The other truth there is that Tina believes that board games are the panacea. They're just gonna
Yes, board games. I am
for the win.
yes, for the win. So, yeah.
What would you what thoughts do you have about working with families to help them understand some of the struggles that their child goes through, and to help them sort of see the struggles in terms of neurodivergence or developmental issues?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I did give a presentation on families that's actually used the model of co-treating a dad and a son at the same time. There were some interesting pieces. They were not on the spectrum, so, you know, it's different. You know, I think the big question there is what's the family's level of how to put this, their ability to put the child first, versus some of their own needs. Often, we just have desires for our kids and want to see them do this and that, and it can be difficult to see them for where they are right now. And so if they're really able to do that, there are a lot of family advocacy skills, as Tina alluded to and described, that are helpful. And if the family dynamics interfere, in the actual trait development and skill development, then that may be better focused in the clinical therapeutic environment instead. Ideally, everybody's on the same team. You can be co-treating is the image.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that, for a lot of individuals with autism, they can end up in a mainstream setting. So you're in an environment, there is a lot of neurodivergence in the mainstream setting, especially now that it's becoming more, more diagnosed. Like people are even getting autism diagnoses later in life and ADHD diagnoses in their 30s and later. And so this is becoming more known. But being in that neurotypical mainstream environment, it can create those comparisons to different peer groups. So for individuals with autism, it's, and their parents, it's thinking of that individual. Where are they? And so even thinking about the parents, do they respond best to a brain approach, teaching about how their brain differences, or do they respond best to a social approach or statistics? We're thinking of what is your entry point and what is your goal? What is your entry point? So kind of like with scaffolding, you scaffold that, where do you want them to end up? And also keeping in mind, as a clinician, is this where I want them to end up, or is this what is best for the client, right? So we're always thinking what is best for the client, what is the best for their family.
A couple of people have asked about sort of online resources or any books, and I don't know if that's included in your reference section, but if you pass along any list like that, we can forward it.
Okay. We get asked about that a lot. It's hard.
Yeah.
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 Books are static, and there's such variety, and talked with a client last week about that, and, just recently got diagnosed as an adult, and reading about it, that's not me, and it just feels difficult. And then there's suddenly wait, that really resonates. And so it's hard to cover it all. And I'm sure in this presentation, we said things that were really not pertaining there, or, hopefully there's just some nuggets to chew on from the presentation.
So here's a more general sort of reflective issue to reflect on. I don't know. And that I'm wondering what kind of differences, if any, you guys have seen pre and post COVID. I mean, I would say, we have seen some differences here. The impact that COVID has had on young adults in general, but maybe in a certain kind of young adults with neurodivergence, the effect of being isolated and that kind of thing. I don't know if you guys have noticed anything that you want to comment on in your practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so relevant. I mean, look at us. We're on Zoom. Would we ever be on Zoom pre-pandemic? Probably not. So we're, some of us are in the comfort of our homes and able to, and I'm so grateful for all of you for attending. But yes, actually, there are so many sides to that question, and I'm gonna maybe surprise you by starting with the positives. So a lot of my clients with autism are grateful for their ability to have remote classes. So some of my clients have really, they had social anxiety related to encountering peers from high school in their college. And so being online allowed them to focus on academics. On the other side, for an art student, being online took away that ability to actually be in the studio, to actually have access to those materials. So the online environment, if you're looking at it from a social model, has created more ability to engage differently in things like, for example, our Zoom meeting right now. But it also has created barriers in traditional learning. And then, of course, the online, everyone being online has led to certain isolation, and maybe I'd have to look at the research more specifically on autism, but being forced in that online environment, you know, has both positive and negative outcomes. And so we are seeing that in our work too, both sides, the positives and the negatives.
One client I worked with felt like when everything went online, they said, "Welcome to my world." You know, this is the way it's been, and it felt much more comfortable. And I think, you know, schools wrestled for a while with like, do you require the camera to be on, you know, during classes and stuff, and you know, that felt much safer for a lot of people to not have the camera on, to try to be interpreting facial expressions. And of course, you have to lean a little heavier on tone of voice and prosody and things like that. But yeah, probably many different, wide variety of responses to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dean Doring picked up on a nuance, maybe not even nuance, of a distinction that I made when I was asking you about resilience. And I sort of cast resilience sort of in the realm of mental health struggles, thinking a lot about our particular population here. But she also, you know, she wondered the distinction between that and thinking of resilience in terms of a neurodevelopmental issue.
So just to clarify, it's like lower resilience associated with neurodivergence. Is that?
I mean, that's what I would read her comment as saying.
You know, it's being able to navigate the social things, the oversensitivity, the misinterpretation, the inaccurate appraisal, you know, working 2 hours a week, you know, which, you know, that just kills you and gets you knocked out of a lot of internships and opportunities.
Yeah. So that is a great question. And yeah, and you know, that is a barrier that they're gonna face, is like finding those spaces that are gonna make those accommodations, and that can be really difficult and really challenging. And so a way to supplement that can be volunteer work. But if it's a question of the individual's actual ability to engage in the employment, it's really like experimenting. Like, what context would they be able to engage enough hours in? Like, and I didn't touch on this as much as we could have, but there's this match between your job and your ability. So there are going to be jobs that are too difficult, and then there are going to be jobs that are the right amount. So for example, maybe working in fast food is too exhausting, 40 hours a week, but maybe taking tickets at the movie theater would be something they would be resilient in. So kind of building that self-awareness around, what could I see myself being resilient 40 hours a week in? Like, that might even be taking the social component out and working with animals at like a doggy daycare. Someone I know with autism works in taking care of animals and they don't have to interact with anyone other than 1 or 2 colleagues. So there are ways to eliminate that social. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, it's a tough question, and that's the reality. Is sometimes they're not going to be where they need to be for the thing that they want, and helping them wrestle with that and just kind of accept that and build their abilities so they can get there.
Thank you. Yeah, it just gets pathologized a lot, and it also creates a lot of shame.
Yes, we saw that too. Yes. Yeah, and then there's independent contract work as well. That might be something to look into, like Upwork and stuff like that, where they can work on their own schedule. And that's a piece with the services cliff with accommodations. You know, you can have extended time in high school, but then on your job, can you submit your assignment late? Not really. So it's like, how do we close that gap in thinking and extend it to employment? But it's a hard question, and it's going to be very individual, that approach. So good luck. I hope, yeah.
All right, well, thank you both so much. I mean, this really very thorough and thoughtful and insightful and helpful. I I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so
And
much for your time and your
we-
questions and hosting it, pulling it together. And it's been a treat.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Really good.
Take care. Yeah, we got a lot of written comments about how great this was too. So
Yes, thank you so much. This was really great. And for all of you that want to share this, it will be up on our website by Friday. If you want to share it with a colleague that would like to have a look.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for attending, everyone.
Wonderful.
thanks.
Have a good one. Take care.